So, hi Jamie, good to catch up with you. You were a patient of mine back in kind of 2017, 2018, and we're now 2022, and you've agreed to come and have a bit of a chat with me about what your journey through pelvic pain looked like. So, can we begin by tell us about the medical side of things. Tell us about the journey that you had to get you to see me all those years ago.
Yeah, and Karl, it's great to be talking to you and to talk about this, because I think it's not talked about enough. And that was certainly one of the things that got me, is that there was no way out, right? There was no path, or there was no visibility about what the path was, because you may remember I was at that time quite active cycling, in particular, doing a lot of sport, and it was pain that started, which I identified initially as being muscular, very much to do with my legs and my pelvis, obviously, but quite mobile and very, very debilitating. And obviously, I got into a medical loop, and I spent, it must have been well over 6 months in that medical process, running up and down through GPs to specialists, through orthopaedic specialists, through a diagnosis of completely unfounded diagnosis of prostatitis with medication and therapy, and huge amounts of, to my mind, the most debilitating aspect is the psychological burden, huge amounts of uncertainty about where it goes, whether there will ever be any possible remediation, whether everything must be constantly re-examined, looked at again, no sense of certainty about the fact there is progression. And that was the worst element of the medical side to me, the constant holding out of just one more thing that may be it, but it's not, and it's this constant loop, a doom loop, I think, is what we remember speaking about this with you, constantly in this place. And of course, one of the things here is this is, and I'm not going to get into the physiology or the paraphysiology of it all, but one of the things is undoubtedly the stress state of the person, the sufferer, right? And it's probably one of the underlying biggest causes of what's going on here, or certainly is one. And this is just a massive exacerbation of that, and that's, I think, was the worst thing about that time period. No one knows what's going on, no one has any answers, it's bad, and you're stuck, and that's a bad place to be.
Yeah, it isn't. It's such a typical pattern for a patient to go through. They're already distressed, you're going through rounds of assessments and treatments, most of which are coming back negative. You're given round after round of different medication, maybe a heady cocktail of antibiotics, some anti-inflammatories in there, alpha blockers. But as you said, no one's giving you any hope. No one's giving you any answers. We don't really know, try this, or there's a different diagnosis that comes up, or a slightly different approach, a different methodology. You then think you've got the silver bullet, and this will be the next thing that gets me through it. But ultimately, it does lead to more distress and more anguish for the individual.
It's exactly right. And there's a famous line in Paradise Lost, which is talking about hope. These are the sharpest arrows in his quiver, and it's exactly that. It's that prospect of the next thing. Just get here, and we'll be over the hump, and you're not. And it's that cycle of raised expectations and disappointment, which then contributes, of course, to the underlying symptoms and the stress state, which is, I think, for me, was a very, very big part of what was going on. And I think, there was an exercise, or what I was doing on the bike was perhaps being a physical trigger, but then there was a loop that came on top of that I found impossible to break until I spent the time with you, until we spent somewhere between, I guess it must have been about 3 months, and it wasn't longer, and there was a sense of, it's almost of ice cracking when you feel that the progress is started. Then the acceleration comes, because then you give yourself, almost give yourself permission to relax and to believe it, and that's when you start actually getting in control of it. That was my experience, at least.
Totally. And you want something to hinge some hope onto as well, don't you? And it can take a little while before change happens, but when it does happen, it can really look to accelerate that sense of, I think I'm starting to crack it here. I'm starting to see some change, and that comes along with that hope and faith, and maybe I can get back to that life that I wanted to have.
Exactly. And you're able to, of course, we're all able to make trade-offs and compromises. We get older, things change, but you need to know that it's within a rational framework. You need to believe that you are to at least a degree that you have agency, that you have the ability to have action upon your own outcomes. And, that can be, I know that if I go out and I drink a lot, I have a hangover, right? Let's choose not to. Sometimes it happens and you live with the consequences, but those are rational choices. And that's what we want to make in our life, and to feel we have, but to feel that, you can take action after action and stress about the choice of those and have no response to them. That's a terrible place to be. And that was the most important thing that I got, from coming to you. And, and I think I remember very well our first few sessions when you must have this with everybody, which is people arrive, and because of the way medicalization works in the West in particular, we want a white pill. We want a solution. We want a switch. And you don't have switches. You don't have solutions, and you don't promise that. And you do what you always do. It's very calm, very kind of, what's the word? It's a very zen state you're in. And you're thinking, God, who is this guy? Give me something. Give me some progress. But it's only actually when you spend some time and you commit to that process, I found, and it was quick, but I found that was when it actually became, this is part of slowing down, dealing what we can deal with, and making incremental progress. And when you realize that there is a direct relationship between some of those activities you can do, the de-stressing activities, the stretching, and some of these things which are addressing the root causes of the, with the inflammatory response or whatever's going on with the, in the pelvic area, then suddenly you really start being able to, that space expands very quickly. And even just the actions of reading those books that you have, or that you shared, to know that other people have done this isn't unique, and that there is progress. There are people now like me who are on the other side. It's a very, very powerful thing to have that. It gives you that space, that permission to yourself to say, this too shall pass. And that was a very powerful thing for me when I gained confidence in that and was able to believe in it. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. You mentioned a really interesting word earlier on about agency, and we do want often people just to give us a silver bullet. We want someone to take the responsibility just to make it better for ourselves.
Right.
When we take agency, when we take ownership of things, and we start to realize, actually, I can play a role in this, I can play a role in my recovery, then actually it starts to empower. And once you feel a bit more empowered and you see the differences, that can be hugely promotional in that cycle of recovery, and that's wonderful.
No, it is, and it's a profound mental shift from being, this is something that I can only endure, that I can only resist, and I can only hold myself up, because all those are bracing yourself, and it gets back to some of the imagery that you use, but it's physical, right? It's all about coiling yourself up. It's all about putting more pressure on yourself physically and psychologically, right? At this point about it's coming, what am I going to do? And turning around to say, you know what? This is something I have the ability to change the outcome of, and I know what those tools are, and I can invest in. And of course, when you have them, then, I remember your stretching routines and, your breathing, which you gave moderate doses for. And of course, when you start seeing the value of that, you end up, I'd spend 3 hours in the night doing that, because my God, it was a great thing to be doing, right? Got some very odd stares from the kids, but, it was a very, very powerful thing just to know that you were taking control of where you were in life, because that's what we all do as adults, right? We're set up for independence, responsibility, and suddenly when this comes along, it takes that away. It reduces you to something that is happening to you. It's like being a child again, I suppose, in that regard. You don't know, the world's confusing, the world's scary. It's a very defensive place to be. But when you get those tools and you're able to go out and engage on that, I found that to be that's the process of recovery, right? When you're able to say, this is what I can do, this is how I can improve myself. So it was a very very short acting as well. I mean, it really was from a point of starting to make some traction, to get some hold on this within a couple of weeks, 3-4 sessions of seeing you, to being 3-4 weeks later on that, thinking, I'm on top of this. And then, maybe a couple of, and everyone's timelines are different. This isn't a competition, but it's that progress of seeing that, just knowing there's teleology here, right? We are moving ahead was very rapid. And that's probably I found one of the most enabling aspects of recovery.
And you mentioned helpless there. So feeling like you can have a hand, like you're being helpful to yourself. Like the nature of where the symptoms are can also make us feel you mentioned there being almost baby-like or childlike again, completely lost at sea. So what were your symptoms, Jamie? Tell us about the locations, if you can, and how that impacted you, the location of the symptoms and how that would impact you.
Yeah, so it started off in pain in both my legs. It would be quite mobile. It would move around. It would be occasionally acute when sitting or in other times. It then it moved up. It was definitely in my groin. It was in my testicles. It was sometimes very acute. I definitely had problems peeing. There was an urge frequency that wasn't, but there'd be no flow, but you have to keep going back. It would be disturbed sleep. And oh my God, we all know what the effects of disturbed sleep are psychologically, right? When you're having to get up in the night to do that. And that becomes just then, of course, you approach even the simple act of going to bed, which we all need with absolute dread. It had a totally disastrous effect on sex life and willingness, even interest in that, just given everything that was going on. There's this whole psychological thing of just ill health, inability to, lack of interest, but nothing's working. So, of course, all the classic feedback loops around that. And this went on for, the pain started for a couple of months, and I just put it down to over-exercising before I sought medical attention. But then it became exacerbated through that 6 months or so when I was going up and down through GP referral specialists, genitourinary specialists, musculoskeletal specialists, and indeed orthopaedic surgeons. And that was, that was a black time. And it wasn't far off a year before I came to see you.
And that's really typical, and you did the right thing, Jamie. You went down the medical route. You made sure there were no medical red flags. You had all the tests, sometimes retested again, just for clarification and reassurance. Yeah. Again, that's a classic response, because patients want to know, why am I getting these symptoms when all the tests are coming back negative, when there's nothing here that's really being flagged up. So that can cause distress. And you mentioned a few things there about how that would impact you as an individual. Your selfhood starts to change. You're a human that's not being anymore. You become a human that is a fraction or a shadow of them former selves. We gave you some stretches. We gave you some breathing techniques. I gave you permission to start exercising again as well. And
yeah, which is huge.
Did that change you?
Which was absolutely huge. It really was, because it was, even if they, and I remember this very well, and this is great coaching on any sports level, right? When you have an injury, you're all chomping at the bit to get back. The worst thing you can do is then, go hard again. But you said, build it up, and you build it up in conjunction with. And I think there was the whole two sides of it, which was the whole exploration of the issue. This is what's going to happen. Here's a roadmap, and here's the other people. Here's the evidence. Believe in this. See how it works. Test it out yourself. And then the practical steps to get yourself back on there. And absolutely getting back on the bike in particular was huge. I invested a lot of my time in cycling in that activity. And to be told that's not who you are anymore, you can't do that. That whole thing is just redundant, because, at this point, my God, I haven't even talked about it, but I was having problems sitting, right? With physical discomfort. And then of course you're trying to maintain a job at the same time, because no one gets you don't get a pass on this stuff. You don't go and get and sit in a convalescent home for 12 months while you kind of figure it out, and it's all very nice and people bring you cups of tea. You're working. You're at home. You're a parent. You've got a full-time job. You've got to get to work. You've got to do all that on the back of having had 3 hours sleep that's been interrupted all night. And you've got the constant worry about nagging away at you. So you're trying to concentrate somewhere, but there's this thing inside you saying, what's wrong with me? How is this ever going to get sorted out? I'll never be able to be doing this again. I'll never be able to get better. And stuff that we all have our things of stress, techniques as elements. And, recreation, it might be going for a walk, it might be going to the pub, it might be seeing a friend, all of those things. One of those things for me was the biking. So to be told at that point, one of those things that reduces your stress levels you can't do, that's a pretty powerful and pretty bad thing, right? That's more stress. One of the the tools and techniques you had available in your normal life are no longer available. So to build that back and just know, do you know what? I discussed with Karl doing 20 minutes. I did 25 minutes. I'm a bit stiff today. That's fine. 20 minutes tomorrow, right? Or the next day, whenever we come back to it. But I know there's progress. And it was 15 minutes last week. And next week, maybe it's half an hour. And it was. And that was a great thing. That was a really great thing to know. There's a plan. We all like to know we're fitting into a sense of progress and order, and that we know where we can actually make a difference. And to have that in place was very enabling, very enabling.
And you did what everyone does, Jamie. You avoided, we're told to avoid the things that are likely to cause symptoms. This is often messaging that comes from urologists and GPs and other medical specialists. Avoid riding, oh, you ride a bike. Oh, well, that's probably the cause of the things that's, avoid alcohol. So avoid the sense of relaxation with friends or going to a restaurant. Avoid caffeine. So I'm knackered and now I can't have a cup of coffee to boost me. And then you might get a mixed message around ejaculation. Don't ejaculate from one specialist to another one saying ejaculate as much as you can. And it's very, very unsettling. So giving patients permission to say, look, let's do these things. Let's get you back to these meaningful activities to give that sense of selfhood again so you can become a human being, but we'll make them graded. And you did what every patient does. You jump the gun a little bit and you're like, I'm doing great. I'm going to go a little bit further.
Of course.
And then you back off a little bit. And that's a learning process as well.
It really is. And that whole sense of, and that was, I think, probably, Karl, one of your greatest gifts, which is a sense of, look, this will pass. We can deal with this. Moderation is where we are right now. Let's build on this. And let's do it with, I think you used an expression of at the time of self-care and of actually investing and being calm and being quiet. We find that very hard to do in the West now. We want instant hit, instant solution, and we want to fill our diary and we want to charge around, and that's how we feel we're satisfied. And there's a sense of that inner calm that's lost in our choosing to drive ourselves into so many directions. But putting that back in and taking quiet satisfaction in 20 minutes of activity, or having one or two drinks, but not pushing it out, at least to start with, as you build back the tolerance, but on a more stable, quietened down platform. There was so much. And I remember you talking about there's so much noise going on in the system. Yes. To be able to just dampen that down sequentially. And one of the biggest exacerbants for that noise is the stress that you get about it. It's like a raging fire that you just chuck more fuel on. I'm stressed, I'm tense, I'm nervous, I can't function, I can't do any of these things that will reduce that. So of course it becomes even more, in this doom loop about it. But to start taking the heat out of it and to realize you can, and this is the effect, and you can then build on that and to turn that vicious circle back the other way and to get the virtue of it. That was really where it was.
And so here we are, 2022. That's 4 years effectively on from where we ended up our journey together. You're sitting comfortably, you're not squirming at the moment. Tell me what life looks like. Give us a brief snapshot of what life looks like for you now compared to what it was then.
Oh, I mean, I've had no symptoms, Karl, for some time, maybe a month or two after I stopped seeing you. None, just nothing whatsoever. I'm fully, I'm cycling. I've been back to before, actually once, was it before? I can't remember now. Yes, before all the stuff that happened over the last couple of years, was back cycling in the Alps again, doing full days in the saddle, no restrictions on activity, no daily issues at all, no problems with any of the systems going ahead. So it's a fantastic place to be, and it's a place which is just it's even hard to even actually sort of terrible thing to say to someone who's doing it at the moment, is going through it, but also a wonderful thing to say that I just can't picture that stress loop that I was in before, and it's had an impact, on personal relationships and on professional relationships. Of course it has. And, it's not a night, I wouldn't wish this on anyone, but having gone through it and come out the other side, you realize that satisfaction you're capable of finding in the smaller things and in that sense of inner peace and restraint is a powerful thing to take forward anyway. It really is. And that's definitely a lasting legacy of it. It really is.
Fantastic. And just to hear and see you enjoying yourself, and that's almost it is a distant memory. It's something of the past. It is difficult to explore and to go back to, but you are where you are because the hard graft and the hard effort you put in to get you to where you are. So if someone's listening to this and they're maybe starting their journey, they're maybe going down the path that you did, Jamie, of seeing urologists and GPs and not really knowing what to do, what would you say to them? What words of wisdom can you give to that person?
I think when we spoke shortly after it finished, Karl, and we were talking about this, one of the things that I really focused on is this sense and a phrase of this too shall pass. That this is a phase which you can see a development of, and there is a life on the other side. I can't remember her name, which Nazine, what's her surname? But the woman who's just been released from Iran, which has been held for 6 years, her husband, who's been this amazing campaigner for all this time, was on television last night talking about her, and he said, you know, she's coming home. It's not done yet. It's a process, but this is a chapter, and I hope we have more chapters. This is one of the things that will always be with us, 6 years, but we have more life ahead of us, and we intend to live that. And that's, you know, no one would want to set out saying, I want a life of pain. I want to be, you know, sitting here for the next X years. But for someone to say, we've got this, that will happen, you will get there, is incredibly powerful, incredibly liberating. And I would want anybody who's in that position to know that that's what happened to me. And I'm pretty sure, from having met people at events you've done and seeing the stuff on your website and your testimonials, Karl, and your whole practice, that this is something that happens to people with, I can't tell you whether there's a 100% statistic, but you know, that's your practice. But it does happen. It's happened to me. It's happened to lots of other people, and done the right way, you will be in charge of your healing, and you can have that effect, and you can put yourself in that place where this is behind you and you're writing new chapters. And that, I would really have loved to have known that when I was going through this, because we've all been in pain. We've all put up with something. You can do that, but it's very debilitating to know you can't do something about it. Well, you can, and it does change. And I think that's a very, very powerful thing to know.
It's a really powerful, and thank you for that, Jamie. It's a really powerful and evocative image that I'm getting, you know, from writing it. You know, there are more chapters. This isn't the way your story ends. This has been a chapter. It's not a very nice chapter, and perhaps not something that you want to revisit, but there are chapters that are written after this as well.
And that's fantastic. Right. Yeah, that's right. No, it's great to talk to you, Karl, and it's continue to be personally exceptionally grateful for you, for the time that we spent together, for the effect it had, but also for your care and your caring and your knowledge through this process. It was a very powerful thing. Bless you.